Another way to improve the visual appearance of your workbooks here in Excel 2019 is to make modifications to the rows and columns. Sometimes you'll need wider columns, sometimes you'll need taller rows, and sometimes you'll need extra columns and extra rows, sometimes you'll need to remove them. That's what we're going to explore in this movie with our Leaf and Mortar Revenues Workbook 0204 if you're catching up. Let's start with rows and columns. It can be tempting to add extra blank rows or extra columns to create extra space, but it's not necessary. And then sometimes it can complicate matters when you start adding and removing content. So let's start with columns. As you can see, we do have an extra column here. Column B has nothing in it. If we want to delete column B, we can select it by clicking the header right at the top, the letter B. And with it selected, there's a couple of things we can do. The long way is to go up here to the ribbon in the cells group. You'll see a delete button. Click the drop-down arrow, the bottom half, to see all the delete options. We don't want to delete cells. That's the contents of the cells. They're empty. But there is an option further down to delete the column. Delete sheet columns will do exactly that. Delete all the columns that are selected. If we selected 3, they'd all be deleted. In this case, it's just one empty column, column B, and when we click it, you can see everything moves over to the left a little bit, and now January data appears in what used to be an empty column. So it's still column B, the empty column has been removed. Same thing if we want to go down to row 10, select it. The shortcut is to actually right-click these things. So if we went up to column B and right-clicked, you can see there is a delete option. If we go over to an empty row like row 10 and right-click, it both selects it and gives us the pop-up menu where we can delete. Removes that blank row. And we could do the same up here. For example, 5. Right-click, delete. We have an extra one here. Right-click 3 and delete. Yes, everything's starting to look like it's all cramped together, but this is where we can start increasing things like column widths and row heights to create that space without adding empty rows and columns. So let's start right at the top. Already, our first row here looks a little bit taller than the rest because of the large font we selected for our title. We can create even more space by going in between rows. Notice when we go to row 1, we see that black arrow pointing to the right. But move down between 1 and 2, and it turns into a double arrow pointing up and down. That means you're ready to click and drag. Clicking and dragging down is going to increase the height, and you can see it in pixels, as well as the actual figure. When you release, you can see you've increased the height of that row. So at this point, we might want to go inside cell A1 where our title was typed and perhaps change the alignment so it uses the middle of this row, and that means going up to the alignment group and choosing a different vertical alignment. Middle align is going to bump it up a little bit, and you can see how we created that extra space without adding an extra blank row. Let's do the same here between November 1st, 2018 and our location. So if we go between 2 and 3, click and drag down to create a little extra space. Do the same thing, click in cell A2 and middle align that, maybe even move it up to the top. Yeah, that looks good. Click in the background to deselect and see what that looks like. All right, so we have our locations in here and maybe a little extra space between those headers, means going in between 3 and 4, clicking and dragging just a little bit, I think. And then if we wanted to go between 4 and 5 and do the same, that way we can leave everything lined up the way it is, but still create that extra space. Of course, the same thing can happen with our column widths. It happened automatically when we chose a much longer date format, but we can go in between to move column widths to the right to make them wider, or to the left to make them narrower. And here's a nice little shortcut. Double-click between any column or row to automatically size it to fit the largest item. For example, if we go over to A and B right in between and double-click, what do you think is going to happen? Go ahead. You can see now column A is much wider than it was because the largest item is our title. And now it all fits in the column, but everything's pushed way out here to the right. So let's go up to the undo button. Control-Z is your keyboard shortcut to bring that back. But it might work better for some of our other columns. And If we wanted to, we could go between B and C and double click to see what happens. You can see how narrow that is. Things start to look a little bit squished. So again, if we go up to the undo button or use Control Z, we'll set it back to the default where we started. This is looking pretty good. If we need extra rows or extra columns, again, the easiest way is to right-click. For example, maybe we do need an extra row up here where we can add quarters. So let's right-click right on the 3 and choose Insert this time. Everything gets pushed down and a new row is inserted. And that can be adjusted as well just by going in between and clicking and dragging. So I think up here above February, we could type something in like Q1. Then we could go over to May and type in Q2. And then let's go over to August for Q3, kind of in the center. We'll go over to November and type in Q4. And we'll select those and format them. I think they should be centered, also in the middle, and bolded like so. Maybe even a little bit bigger than the others. Let's bump it up to 14. Click in the background to deselect. So as you can see, we have full control over our rows, their heights, the number of rows. We can easily remove and add them. Same thing goes for columns and their widths. Adding and removing columns, the easiest way is to go up to the top and use that right-click option. Otherwise, you're going up to the cells group for inserting and deleting rows and columns.